Now, the last thing I think we need to get into here is that you have, as a result of those activities of the 1960s, despite the virulence of the repression that's visited upon political activists at the time, a fundamental destabilization of the structure in U.S. society. You have a situation of flux that has been created. The possibility then opens up for this constructive social, economic, material change, and you have a dissipation. The dissipation is caused by the nature of the repression. Then you have a regrouping, a period of that occurs during the 1970s. The system is kind of off balance, but it reorganizes itself. And in 1980, you have the advent of Ronald Reagan in the presidency of the U.S. And this has significance for Canada as well. Because you have the beginning of what has been referred to not too affectionately as the third worldization of North America. You have the export of productive facilities to the third world for cheaper labor sources. You have an increasing centralization of the command and control structures, both politically and economically, but you have a decentralization, diversification of the mode of production. The disemployment, not only of an increasingly large sector of the black and brown population, but the total disemployment of some areas of Native America and so on, and the Damoclean sword of the same thing happening over an increasingly large proportion of the U.S. and Canadian working class. You understand? The jobs are going elsewhere and cheaper. You got runaway productive facilities. And you got the roll-up. The steel industry in the United States just about disappears. Actual manufacturing begins to drop off precipitously throughout North America. The manufacturing begins to occur, and you got high-tech industries and service industries beginning to take over a larger and larger share of the economy in North America. And you got a marginalization and a sense of impending doom that begins to settle in over a larger and larger section of the population. White people, workers, by and large, are being terrified by the prospect of being placed in essentially the same position that their presumptive inferiors, that is black and brown menial laborers, have been in for a long time. That is permanently not unemployed but disemployed. Disemployed by virtue of there's no structural place for them to seek employment within the overall economy. This creates a tension of polarity where they're trying to push people of color away and out. This is where you begin to see this sudden upsurge in, well, I'd call it yingoism. All the attention is being paid to preventing illegals from Mexico from coming back into occupied portion of Mexico, that is the southwestern United States. The attempts to cut back, as they did with the old anti-Asian immigration laws, the flow of people from South and Southeast Asia, from Indonesia and so forth. People of color, Haiti. Unless they happen to be Cuban political refugees, of course. Okay, Cubans can get into the United States all day long for a relatively benign environment. Haitians who are facing outright murder for remaining in Haiti, of course, are turned back to Haiti to be murdered. You got this sort of color polarity with an ideological tinge that begins to take hold, and you got an increasingly large portion of the United States population that is endorsing it, based upon a very narrow perception of self-interest. I can keep my job, but I have to keep these people away to do it. I can keep my job, but because I've got a job, I'm better off and they resent me for it. Well, there might actually be something to that one. Okay, but because of that, I need a greater and greater degree of state protection for my own position. Well, as a situation of deepening impoverishment, you can follow Manning Marabell's data on this if you like. The situation of African Americans overall declines by the early 1980s to a level lower than that was achieved 1960s, or you can look at 1950s or clear back into the 1940s. You got to go clear back to the 1930s to find overall economic indicators of impoverishment affecting African Americans, to the extent that you find after a little more than half of the first Reagan term has gone by. You got the same kind of situation with Latinos. You got reservations in the United States, Pine Ridge being a notable example, where you've had unemployment that's run into the upper 80th, lower 90th percentile every year for the last 50 years. The poorest single county in the United States is not down in Sharecropper, Mississippi. It's Shannon County on the Pine Ridge Reservation, and it has been every year since they started to tabulate that information. You've got what they used to call boat people, the Vietnamese immigrants who are being marginalized, used as fodder on the fishing boats, and are basically living 16 to a room in fishing villages, small towns along the California and Texas coasts, who are essentially working full-time and overtime and starving to death at the same time. And what you got, and quite predictably so, because none of this was unanticipated by the economic planners, as profit rates are pushed through the ceiling during the 1980s, is increasing level of dis-ease. Dis-ease. And that dis-ease is leading to an acting out of discontent. And the acting out of that discontent ultimately threatens to create an upsurge like occurred during the latter period of the 1960s. And that in turn threatens a possibility of social transformation that will eliminate these spiraling profit rates in the ever wealthier section of the population that sits at the very pinnacle of this whole thing. It is right there where you start hearing the rhetoric about the need for greater degree of police protection, need for stiffer sentencing laws, a bail reform act that means that judges no longer need to release non-capital defendants, or they're not even defendants yet in a lot of cases, on bail, but you can hold them as a threat to the community for an indefinite period of time. Well, that leads to little results like Filiberto Ojeda Reyes, the Puerto Rican independentista, who was arrested on fallacious charges, being held 6 years pending trial, and then acquitted, having already served his sentence before he ever got to trial. Little things like that, techniques for the police. And the Reaganite demand or call, the clarion call, for a doubling of the number of available prison beds. Now, who is it to go into those prison beds? It is to be not those who are acting out in a tangible criminal fashion, but those who are acting unruly, disorderly, okay, based upon their dis-ease and discontent. And who would that be predominantly? Well, self-evidently, the lower you go on that social hierarchy that the state was designed to impose, the more diseased and disorderly you're apt to become. So you would look at American Indians, you would look at African Americans, particularly those in the inner city or in the sharecropper sections of the South. You would look at the Latino population, primarily from the migrant flow. You would look, and you would find that 1 in 3 African American males in the United States is either currently in prison, in the process of being imprisoned, that is, they're in the judicial process, or has been released from prison. We got 1.8 million people locked up in actual penal facilities in the United States right now. How many you got in Canada? I mean, you can't compare to the U.S. U.S. leads the world in this, so don't be shy or embarrassed. You're going to come in second no matter what you do. 1.8 million people actually locked up. That's a better part of 2 million people. 1.8 is close enough you could call it 2. There's 2.1 million, as I understand it, who are on various forms of, not actual facilities, but like house arrest, you know, where you get to wear the little electric bracelet so that you don't get to leave your bedroom without permission to go pee, whatever. They have that. And in a place like California, you got upwards of 75% of the overall prison population are people of color. Okay? You got, in terms of capital cases, black defendants, brown defendants, who together, you got about 12% of the population that's black. You got a little under that who are Latino in the overall United States, and yet you got 75% of the death row inmates are either black or Latino. American Indians, they don't even bother to tabulate in normal statistical printouts because the population group is considered to be 0.6% of the population. That's half of 1%. But on the other hand, the actuality is, I don't know what the national data is. I haven't seen anybody who has compiled it yet. But in key states where you have a significant Aboriginal population in the United States, like Montana, you have a rate of incarceration even higher than blacks. The axe falls on the most oppressed. The axe falls on the most oppressed, and to make those who are oppressed but not so oppressed feel fortunate that they are not in the same circumstance, to keep them like mice running on the same treadmill, in fear, in intimidation, under a certain psychological coercion, pursuing a false image of what their interests might be at the expense of the others, clamoring for the building of more prison beds, more prisons for that matter, more police to put people in prison, more prosecutors, fewer appeals. Ultimately, you got 1 in 3 black males between 18 and 25 years of age incarcerated now. Double the number of prison beds, which they're calling for again. You're going to have all the black males between 18 and 25 incarcerated, okay? And then what? You still got empty prison beds. Wonder who's going to go there? The people who are applauding and cheering and demanding are superfluous to the immediate interest of the state, but they're conned into acting in a way which is tangibly against their own self-interest, and in a way which actually reinforces the profit-making potential of the state, because prisons and prisoners who are within prisons are the one group constitutionally exempted from being enslaved in the United States. It says that there shall be no slavery in the United States with the exception of people duly convicted and imprisoned, and they can be compelled to work as chattel in order to pay their own way and save taxpayers the expense.